Hi, my name is John Isberg, and I'm here to take you through a little professional development lesson about TPACK. So I'm going to show you how to implement TPACK. This is really good if you're an educator at any type of level, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, or even higher education like undergraduate and graduate. So first, I'm going to start with a video that's going to give us a good description of what TPACK is.
In discussions of learning technologies, you may have heard the acronym TPCK or TPACK. TPACK stands for Technological, Pedagogical, and Content Knowledge. So to understand what this is, we first need to draw a few circles. Let's start with a green circle and call this technology. Technology represents technical knowledge, so the ability to use software, the ability to use a computer, and so forth. There are other domains of knowledge as well, like for instance, content knowledge. So put a C for content knowledge. This includes, if you're a high school language arts teacher, language arts. This includes science, social studies, and so forth. So what you as a teacher are trying to convey to your students. And also working off Schulman's idea, there's an idea of pedagogical knowledge as well. So this is how to teach. So for instance, though you may be an expert in quantum physics, you may not know how to teach quantum physics. Or if you're an expert in Shakespeare, you may not know how to teach Shakespeare. Similarly, there is a subdomain of knowledge called PCK, which is where pedagogical knowledge of a subject and content knowledge meet to allow you to effectively teach that specific content knowledge. Similarly, the authors of TPACK propose that there are other subdomains as well, like for instance, a technological content knowledge area in which you know the technology and how it relates to your content knowledge. So again, if you teach social studies, you know how to use technology to support your research in that field or your study of that field. Similarly, there's technological pedagogical knowledge in which you know how to use technology to support teaching. Now, the whole idea of TPACK is to get at something that we failed at getting at in learning technologies for many years. That's the central idea here. And this is how all three of these, technology, pedagogy, and content knowledge, work together in a very complicated way to support good teaching. Now, TPACK has been under some attack because it does propose to be an entire package or the full view of technological integration. And part of the response that TPACK authors have come up for in defending TPACK have been to put a dotted circle around everything that they say is context. So if you're in an elementary school, for instance, the way TPACK looks would be very different than if you were in higher education. If you were in the corporate sector, this might be very different as well. So ultimately though, TPACK tries to get at understanding how these three domains of knowledge interact with one another and creating subdomains that are essential to understand to support effective technological integration.
All right, so that seemed like a lot of information there in that 3-minute burst. And if your head's kind of spinning with all this TPACK stuff, no worries, because we're going to recap how you can integrate all this technology, your pedagogy, and your content into one. So if you follow along with your note sheet, I'm going to give you an example for each one of these overlapping circles today. So to get technology covered, I'm going to be using the Nearpod. This is the Nearpod. It's a really awesome way of presenting where it's similar to like PowerPoint, but students can follow along on their phone. So right now, I'm logged in on my phone. It'll give you a code at the beginning of the class, and I can follow along as a student with my code. And as I am controlling the pace as an instructor, it's keeping my students on task because I can see who's logged in and who's not. So I really like this for a technological piece because as we go through, I'll show you how there's different ways for students to participate with having their phone in their hand. There's going to be like quizzes that they can complete, open-ended questions, maybe even draw a picture. So where I can get my kind of technology and pedagogy to overlap is how I engage my students. So I'm going to start this lesson by using pop culture figures to tie in how Japanese culture, history, and Japanese, like all the way back to from the medieval times, very early periods of Japan, play an influence on celebrities and pop culture today. And I know that my students are going to be familiar with the celebrities and shows that are going to be in this presentation because I've already done an interest inventory at the beginning of the year, right? So they talked about Black Panther was one of their favorite movies. So I have Michael B. Jordan up there, and this will make more sense in a second. So through my pedagogy is to learn, base my lessons off of my learner's interest. So I start the lesson off by asking the students not to say anything and just look at the figures that are on the board here. So we start with Michael B. Jordan. This is Waka Flocka Flame. Holly Holm. I wouldn't be saying this as an instructor, I'm just telling this to you guys, so you will know. Donald Glover and Chance the Rapper. So here's where Nearpod gets cool, because right now this is the instructor view, but what the students would be seeing is a quiz on their phone. Now with this quiz, the question is, who are these people? And I've got the correct answer is highlighted as D, but they can obviously pick between the four answers there. So the students submit their answers, and me as a teacher, I can see that they answered 100% correct, right? They all answered D. I might have a lot of different data points on here as the lesson goes. Let's say maybe 3 kids picked A, a couple kids picked B, but you understand how the quiz works then. So then I have an open-ended question, which is really cool, because on their phone, it's going to give them a place where it'll ask the question, what do these celebrities have in common? And then it gives them a spot to type their answer, right? So now I can type this and say, maybe one student says they are all young. This will come up in a second. I don't know why it's saying answers. I just said, okay. So I can have the students with their name. They'll come up here and they'll see the answers. So this student answered they're all young. The answer I was looking for is that they were all, that Dragon Ball Z was an influence on them at their creativity, at their determination, at their mentality, at any point in their careers. Now, here's where I'm going to start to tie in my content with my technology, my pedagogy, right? I have Nearpod as my technology. I have students' interest as my pedagogy, and now I'm going to start bringing in my content. So I'm going to say, well, Dragon Ball Z was influenced by Japanese culture from thousands of years ago, and we're going to see how that got to today. Then this one has a short video, and it will give you the option whether you want to play on all devices or just this device only. So we'll say this device only. Now, here's where the lesson, it's already been very differentiated between the different ways students can answer on their phone or by raising their hand.
Hip-hop's love for Dragon Ball is no secret. The long-running manga and anime was originally created in 1984 by Japanese artist Akira Toriyama and burst onto American screens in the late 90s with its successor, Dragon Ball Z, on Cartoon Network's afternoon programming block, Toonami.
Dragon Ball Z, season 530.
Many of today's rappers grew up watching the show, and Adult Swim creative director Jason DeMarco said that DBZ is, quote, empowerment fantasy, and that many young minorities told him they loved the show, saying, quote, I get why that same kid would become a rapper and then rap about wanting to be like Goku because you take your heroes where you can get them. There are thousands of hip-hop lyrics that reference Dragon Ball's characters and their strengths, weaknesses, appearances, and personalities. Here.
So that just gives me a little recap of how Dragon Ball Z influenced our celebrities. And then I take that back to the Heian period, right? So this is 794 and 1156, that long time ago in Japan. I'm gonna, as the lesson goes on, I have a little geography in here, and that is really my content knowledge, right? I'm gonna bring geography, I'm gonna start bringing in the time period, I'm gonna give some facts about the Heian period, maybe have a note sheet for them to fill out. This is another really cool technology piece, which is you can do a virtual reality tour. So students can log in on their phone and you can give them a few minutes to look around. So I might be telling them to look at the architecture on the screen, look at the stones, look at these characters over here. And this is really self-paced, like how the learner wants to view it, right? I gotta figure out how to exit this VR. There we go. Now I have another VR. And I can tell the students to look for similarities and differences in the two settings. And I'll eventually go on to say the first VR tour was from a historically preserved place in China, and the second one was from Japan. That's going to lead me to my point of cultural borrowing, right? So how the Japanese in that time borrowed from the Chinese culture. And there's one thing that I'm going to tie my lesson all together with, and that's Buddhism, and that's where Dragon Ball Z comes into play. So first with, okay, why is he hitting me with all this stuff? Then I start talking about Buddhism. I start talking about the principles of meditation and finding your strength, and that's a really big part of Dragon Ball Z, is that it exhibit a lot of Buddhist ideas. So now I've been able to say, I've used my technology to engage, I've used my pedagogy to engage, and now I'm tying my content all together to make those overlapping TPACK circles. Let's see. I'm going to talk about the different ways that literature was spread throughout Japan. Again, I have Dragon Ball Z tying to Buddhism. It was based off, I can explain like The Journey to the West, the book that the original series Dragon Ball was based off of. Then I have a quiz to follow up all that to see if the kids have been paying attention. So again, I have my quiz here, and this is pretty cool because it has a bunch of different questions. So like, what concept helped shape early Japanese culture? And I have my answers. Obviously, I want them to say cultural borrowing and diffusion. What is the early historical period called in Japan? Heian. What socioeconomic group is the Heian period mostly focused on? Aristocracy. And what famous book gives historians information on the Heian period? And it should be the Pillow Book. Okay. So once I have the answers in, whoop, and watch out for that desk there. It's cool because I can see what every student did. Here's my formative assessment for how I did on this lesson or how engaged they were. This is another really cool thing. So we talked about how we know about the Japanese society back in 794, the Heian period, because of the art and literature they left behind. So I've had students answer multiple choice, but now they can also draw on here. Let me get a little drawing on my phone going. So details about your life. Let's say my life is all about, I'm not the best drawer, but I'm going to try and draw a basketball hoop. let's say I want historians to know that ball is life, right? So I can go through, and there might be several student pictures on here, and it's just a really fun way to get the students engaged and involved in the lesson. And then this could be like a diary thing. So today, again, now the students are taking command over the learning because they're answering on their phone, just like the open-ended question that you saw up there. And then I kind of finish out my presentation, and it all comes full circle. So this is a really long presentation. I wanted to show a lot of different ways where you could get your overlappings. So if you want to write down for your note sheet, if you still need help with that, your T, your technology, is Nearpod, right? I'm integrating students' devices, whether it's an iPad, whether it's a phone, or their own computer. And I'm integrating a projector in my own computer and a software that's Nearpod. Now my pedagogy, I've used things from pop culture, right? Learners' interests that are outside of academics, because that's something that's big in my pedagogy, is to find out what learners like and involve that to really have them buy into the lesson. And then finally, I'm putting that all together. I found a way to tie their interest in pop culture into the history of Japan. So that's a really, I know it seems like a lot with all these different aspects of TPACK and how all these areas overlap, but if you take the time to get to know your students and get to know your software, it's actually really simple to tie that content in, because everything that's art related or music related, those things were inspired by literature from the past. So my experiences with social studies, I found a great way to tie that in, but I'm sure you could find another way for either science or definitely English. So I hope you enjoyed everything today, and if you'd like more tips and tricks, feel free. My information's at the bottom of the sheet, and have a great day. Thanks.